In November 1942, in the midst of the Second World War, a British merchant ship was sailing alone across the South Atlantic. It was not a warship. It was not heavily armed. It carried cargo along a dangerous route dominated by German submarines. On board was a young Chinese sailor named Poon Lim. He was not an officer, not a commander. He was a steward aboard the merchant vessel SS Ben Lomond, responsible for internal duties. Like many Chinese seamen of the era, he worked on British ships during a global conflict that had turned the oceans into silent and deadly battlefields. On November 23, 1942, everything changed. Without warning, Ben Lomond was torpedoed by a German submarine in the South Atlantic. The impact was devastating. The ship sank quickly. There was no time for organized evacuation. Explosion and chaos engulfed the vessel. Poon Lim managed to reach the water and, miraculously, found a floating life raft. There was no coordinated crew around him. No nearby convoy. The ship disappeared beneath the waves. He was alone. The South Atlantic is vast, relentless, and indifferent. In many of its central routes, there are no nearby islands. Currents can carry survivors thousands of kilometers. And wartime conditions made shipping lanes even more dangerous and unpredictable. At that moment, Poon Lim did not know how long he would have to endure. He did not know if any ship would pass. He did not even know in which direction he was drifting. He had only what was on the raft. The life raft contained limited supplies, some fresh water, hard biscuits, a flashlight, signal flares, and a few basic survival items. For most, those provisions might last days, perhaps weeks at best. Poon Lim would remain there for 133 days. He quickly understood that he would need more than the initial supplies. The biscuits would run out. The water would run out. The tropical sun burned fiercely during the day, while nights could be cold and damp. Storms were frequent. Sharks circled. He improvised tools. Using wire pulled from the raft itself, he fashioned fishing hooks. With pieces of material from the craft, he created fishing implements. He caught fish. He caught seabirds that landed on the raft. He drank rainwater whenever possible. Poon Lim's survival was not passive luck. It was active adaptation. He created routines. He exercised to keep his body functioning. He mentally organized the days. He marked time to maintain awareness. He understood that to survive physically, he also had to survive psychologically. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Ships passed in the distance but did not see him. On at least one occasion, a vessel appeared to notice him but did not approach, possibly failing to recognize his nationality or fearing engagement in a war zone. He endured. The Atlantic offered no shelter. No land in sight. Only horizon. Poon Lim drifted, carried slowly by ocean currents across thousands of kilometers. And the war continued, indifferent to the solitary man on a raft. The first days after the sinking were ruled by the most primitive instinct: survive until the next sunrise. The initial shock gave way to the brutal awareness of absolute solitude. The SS Ben Lomond had vanished. No other survivors were in sight. The ocean was a liquid desert stretching endlessly in every direction. Poon Lim began by consuming the raft's provisions with extreme caution. He rationed the hard biscuits, drank small amounts of water at a time, and avoided unnecessary movement under the scorching sun. But he understood that this was temporary. The food would run out. The water would run out. That was when his ability to improvise became decisive. Using metal wires taken from the raft structure, he shaped small fishing hooks. With available rope, he fashioned fishing lines. At first, success did not come easily. The ocean does not give up food willingly. But he persisted. Eventually he caught fish. He learned that pieces of fish could serve as bait to catch more. He also discovered how to capture seabirds that landed on the raft, especially during calm periods. He used every part of the animal: meat for nourishment, bones for tools, even blood as a source of liquid when necessary. It was survival in its rawest form. Water remained the greatest challenge. Whenever it rained, he stretched every available surface to collect as much rainwater as possible. He stored it in improvised containers. During prolonged dry spells, desperation crept closer. The tropical heat evaporated moisture quickly, and dehydration was a constant threat. Storms were another extreme test. Violent waves could overturn the raft at any moment. He had to tie himself to the structure to avoid being thrown into the sea. With each storm came the real risk of losing everything: supplies, improvised tools, even the raft itself. The South Atlantic offered no stability. It offered cycles of exhaustion. Sharks were another constant presence. They often circled the small craft, drawn by fish scraps or bird remains. On one occasion, according to later accounts, he managed to catch a small shark using ingenuity and strength, securing additional food. Each victory was small against the vastness of the ocean, but it was enough to extend life. As the weeks passed, physical deterioration became evident. Constant sun exposure burned his skin. Salt and humidity caused sores. Irregular nutrition led to weight loss. Yet he maintained discipline. He created small daily routines to prevent apathy. He moved his body to avoid atrophy. He kept his mind active by counting days, observing star patterns, mentally tracking time. Loneliness may have been the greatest enemy. There was no conversation. No human voice. Only wind, water, and the occasional beating of wings. Ships appeared on the horizon more than once. On at least one occasion he managed to signal. But none approached. War made every vessel cautious. A small speck in the ocean could be ignored, or simply not identified. And days became months. Poon Lim did not know he was slowly being carried by currents toward the coast of South America. He had no maps, no compass. His world was limited to the size of the raft and the range of his sight. What kept him alive for 133 days was not luck alone, nor physical endurance alone. It was continuous adaptation. It was mental discipline. It was the ability to transform minimal resources into tools for survival. Each sunrise represented a renewed decision to continue. The ocean offered no promise of rescue. No visible hope. Yet he endured. As the weeks passed, his body weakened, but his determination did not. The silent drift continued, unseen by a world at war. Time at sea stops being measured in hours and begins to be measured in endurance. Poon Lim no longer counted weeks, he counted survivals. Every day he managed to catch a fish, every rainfall that filled his improvised containers, every night the raft withstood rough seas was a small victory against a slow and nearly invisible death. His body had changed. He was thinner, muscles reduced, skin marked by constant exposure to sun and salt. Wounds opened and healed with difficulty. Yet he could still move, still fish, still think clearly enough to maintain his routine. Discipline became his axis of stability. He kept approximate schedules to attempt fishing. He conserved energy during the hottest hours of the day. He shielded himself from the sun as best he could, using parts of the raft to create partial shade. Every movement was calculated to stretch his physical reserves as long as possible. The currents were slowly carrying him westward, though he did not know it with certainty. Without navigational instruments or maps, he could only observe the sky and the behavior of the sea. The horizon remained unchanged, an endless line where water and sky merged. At times hope was pushed to its limits. Ships on the horizon seemed like mirages. From a distance, it was impossible to know whether they had truly seen the tiny raft. Signal flares were scarce and had to be used with extreme caution. One mistake could mean wasting the only chance to draw attention. Still he endured. In early April 1943, after 133 days adrift, the environment began to change subtly. The behavior of birds suggested proximity to land. The water showed different patterns, more coastal currents. But he could not be certain. Then, finally, Brazilian fishermen spotted the small raft off the coast of Brazil, near the mouth of the Amazon River. It was April 5, 1943. When they found him, Poon Lim was alive, severely weakened but conscious. He had lost significant weight, yet he was not on the brink of immediate death. His survival had been the result of strategy, adaptation, and extraordinary psychological resilience. He was taken ashore and given care. British authorities later confirmed his identity and officially recorded his remarkable story of survival. 133 days alone in the Atlantic Ocean. During the Second World War. Without support. Without human contact. Without any guarantee of rescue. His story quickly gained international recognition. The British government awarded him the British Empire Medal for bravery and endurance. His experience became a reference case in naval survival manuals. The United States Navy studied his ordeal as an extreme example of open-sea survival and adaptation. What makes Poon Lim's story so extraordinary is not only the duration, though 133 days is remarkable. It is the context. He was not a trained explorer prepared for extreme survival. He was not a specialized military operative. He was a ship's steward, thrown into the ocean by a torpedo in the midst of global war. And yet he survived. While naval battles determined the fate of nations, while submarines hunted cargo ships across the Atlantic, while the war reshaped the map of the world, one solitary man endured silently on a raft, carried only by ocean currents and by the daily decision to remain alive. The ocean tried to defeat him with heat, thirst, hunger, storms, and loneliness. It failed. Poon Lim's story stands as one of the greatest true maritime survival narratives of the 20th century. There is no exaggeration, no myth, only human endurance in the face of absolute emptiness. Rescue did not simply mark the end of the drift. It marked the return of a man who, statistically, should not have been alive. By the time Brazilian fishermen found him, he had traveled thousands of kilometers, carried only by ocean currents. There was no engine, no sail, no direction, only the invisible flow of the South Atlantic slowly guiding that small raft toward the continent. Once ashore, his story had to be verified. In the middle of the Second World War, any survivor found adrift could raise suspicion. But records confirmed the truth. He was a crew member of the British ship SS Ben Lomond, torpedoed months earlier. He was the only known survivor of that vessel. His survival quickly drew the attention of British authorities. It was not merely an inspiring story, it was a case study. How could someone endure so long in open sea with such limited resources? How did he maintain mental balance in absolute isolation? Accounts indicate that discipline was fundamental. He established rules for himself. He created daily goals. He turned survival into a sequence of concrete tasks: fishing, collecting water, organizing tools, observing the sky. By dividing time into objectives, he prevented his mind from being swallowed by the endless horizon. The psychology of survival is often more decisive than physical strength. Despair paralyzes. Hopelessness erodes. Poon Lim faced not only hunger and thirst, but the absolute silence of the ocean. No human voice for more than 4 months. No guarantee that rescue would come. No certainty that he was even approaching land. And yet, he did not abandon the logic of continuation. This is central to his story. He did not survive by waiting to be saved, he survived by acting to stay alive. His hope was not passive, it was operational. After the war, his story continued to circulate as an extraordinary example of human endurance. He was awarded the British Empire Medal in recognition of exceptional bravery. His experience was incorporated into naval survival manuals, not as legend but as documented fact. The historical context also matters. In 1942 and 1943, the Atlantic was one of the most dangerous places on Earth. The Battle of the Atlantic saw German submarines attacking Allied shipping routes critical to the war effort. Thousands of sailors died in cold waters far from any shore. Survival for days was rare. Weeks, almost impossible. Months, unthinkable. And yet, he endured for 133 days. His story is often compared to other maritime survival narratives, but it stands apart because of its total isolation, wartime context, and extreme duration. There was no island for shelter. No lifeboat full of survivors supporting one another. No heavy commercial traffic offering frequent chances of rescue. There was only open sea. Returning to life on land required readjustment. Eating regularly again. Sleeping without the constant motion of waves. Hearing human voices after months of silence. The body can adapt to extreme conditions, but the mind carries the imprint of isolation. Still he moved forward. What makes this story so powerful is not only physical endurance, but symbolism. While the world was divided by global conflict, while nations mobilized fleets and armies, one man fought a personal war against nature. No weapons, no flags, no headlines, only survival. The Atlantic Ocean, a stage for complex military strategy during that era, was also the setting for one of the greatest individual demonstrations of resilience in the 20th century. And perhaps that is the essence of Poon Lim's story. When everything around you is vast and indifferent, what remains is the quiet decision to continue. After 133 days adrift, Poon Lim's return to civilization was not merely a rescue. It was the conclusion of an invisible journey that almost no one in the world even knew was unfolding. While decisive battles were being fought in Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific, the story of that young Chinese sailor was taking place in absolute silence, far from headlines and far from military radar. He did not survive by chance. He survived because he quickly understood that the ocean would offer no mercy. He survived because he turned a life raft into shelter, metal wires into hooks, scraps of wood into tools. He survived because he made discipline his psychological anchor. There was no concrete promise of immediate rescue, only the daily task of continuing to breathe, to fish, to collect water. The Battle of the Atlantic is often remembered as a strategic confrontation between German submarines and Allied convoys. But within that vast naval campaign lie individual stories that reveal the human dimension of war. The SS Ben Lomond was only one of hundreds of ships sunk. thousands of sailors vanished beneath the waves. Very few had the chance, or the ability, to endure for so long. Poon Lim became an absolute exception. His survival drew attention because it defied medical and logistical expectations. Experts studied his case to understand how he managed to maintain minimal levels of nutrition and hydration for such an extended period. Improvised fishing was essential. Careful collection of rainwater was decisive. Conservation of bodily energy was strategic. Yet there was one factor impossible to measure precisely: mental strength. Extreme isolation is recognized as one of the most challenging conditions for the human mind. The ocean offers no fixed reference points. The horizon barely changes. There is no visible calendar. Time loses structure. Repetition can become overwhelming. In many maritime survival accounts, psychological collapse precedes physical decline. He avoided that collapse by creating daily purpose. That may be the most powerful lesson of his story. Survival does not depend solely on material resources. It depends on the ability to organize chaos into manageable tasks. By dividing his struggle into small goals, securing food today, storing water tomorrow, protecting the raft during a storm, he transformed an impossible situation into a sequence of concrete challenges. When he was finally rescued near the Brazilian coast, he was not just physically alive, he was living proof of extreme human adaptability. British authorities formally recognized his endurance, and his story entered military and maritime records as a documented case of open-sea survival. He was not a high-ranking officer. He was not a commander. He was a working seaman. And yet, he became the central figure in one of the greatest individual survival stories of the 20th century. The Atlantic Ocean, at that time a route of strategic convoys, war submarines, and global conflict, was also the silent stage of an invisible battle. One man against hunger, thirst, loneliness, and immensity. Hundreds of days after the torpedo that destroyed his ship, he stepped once more onto solid ground. And the world, which had scarcely noticed his disappearance, came to know his story. When Poon Lim finally returned to solid ground, there were no grand parades and no headlines rivaling the great battles of the war. The world was still engulfed in conflict. Ships continued to be torpedoed. Soldiers continued advancing across distant fronts. Yet, quietly, one of the greatest maritime survival stories of the 20th century had just been written. He did not defeat an army. He did not command a fleet. He did not alter the course of the war. But he defeated the ocean. For 133 days, alone on a small raft in the Atlantic, he endured what few human beings could withstand. Prolonged hunger, looming dehydration, violent storms, scorching sun, freezing nights, and the crushing weight of absolute isolation. What could have been just another name lost in the statistics of the Battle of the Atlantic became a symbol of extreme human resilience. His survival was not a mystical miracle. It was the result of observation, improvisation, discipline, and mental strength. He turned scarcity into strategy. He turned routine into psychological protection. He turned despair into a daily task. As ocean currents slowly pushed him toward South America, he did not know he was approaching land. He did not know that each passing day brought him closer to rescue. He simply continued. And perhaps that is the most powerful essence of this story, continuing even without any guarantee of salvation. Amid a global war involving empires, submarines, and complex military strategies, one anonymous man fought a silent battle against nature. There were no speeches, no flags, only the sound of wind and waves. Today, Poon Lim's story stands as a documented and real reference in maritime survival history. It is not exaggerated legend. It is fact. It is a human chapter within a global conflict. It is proof that even in the most extreme circumstances, adaptation and discipline can extend life far beyond what seems possible. And perhaps, when we reflect on his story, we realize that greatness does not always lie in military victories or strategic decisions. Sometimes it lies in the quiet endurance of someone who refuses to give up. If you've made it this far, it's because you value real, in-depth stories grounded in historical fact. So leave a like on this video. It helps the channel continue producing long, detailed, immersive documentaries like this one. And if you're not yet subscribed, subscribe now. Here you'll find real naval and military history told with context, emotion, and historical rigor. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapters in this journey through history. See you in the next chapter.